On Mother's birthday, my children debated whether I should attend. I brought a single white rose and left it on the chair where she used to sit. The next morning, a courier visited each of their homes. The envelope felt heavier than money. If you're reading this, tell me where you're watching from. Tell me which city, which cafe, which quiet bedroom at midnight. Because I want to know how far a father's voice can travel when his own house grows too small for it. I want to know how far the echo of a white rose can carry. My name does not matter much, not anymore. The only name that mattered to me belonged to my wife, the woman my children called Mother. And on Mother's birthday, my children stood in my hallway and argued whether I should be allowed to sit at my own table. They tried to keep their voices down. They didn't know that the walls remember what love used to sound like, and that memory makes everything louder. I stood near the coat rack, my hands still and empty, because I had learned long ago that empty hands can be gentler than words. Through the cracked door, I heard my eldest son say, "It will ruin the evening if he comes. He'll make it about him." He said it in the slow, careful tone he uses when he wants to sound reasonable. That tone is a mask. Masks are useful. My son thinks I do not own one. Just this once, he added. And someone, my daughter-in-law, murmured, "It's better for everyone." Another voice chimed in, my younger boy, his voice trying to be light. He won't take it personally. He knows how tense things get. I almost smiled at that. They were all very tense. The only person who used to relax them was not there to do it anymore. Tell me where you're reading this from, because maybe you're far from your father too. And distance can make a man brave. But on that evening, distance was not measured in miles. It was measured in my children's eyes when I opened the door and stepped into the dining room. It was measured in how they could not look at me straight away. There were candles on the table. My wife loved candles. She said flames made even cheap plates look like heirlooms. The house smelled of rosemary chicken and somebody's expensive cologne. I could hear the nervous clink of forks and the whisper of napkins being unfolded, and the way the room wanted to push me back into the hallway, like the sea pushing a body off the shore. I should say something about my wife before we go further. She had this way of making small things holy. She kept every birthday card in a box tied with a ribbon, and when she felt overwhelmed, she would take the box out and read one at random and say, "Look, see? We loved each other then. We love each other still." She laughed with her whole mouth. She cried in private, except once, the day our eldest started school and pretended not to need us. Back then, we were a unit, a team. Back then, the house was a harbor. Life does not announce when it stops being those things. It simply pulls away, one polite inch at a time. I held the white rose in my hand, the kind she liked, the kind she put in a jar on the kitchen windowsill every summer, and I walked around the table without a word. No one stopped me. They did not rise to greet me. They tried on expressions like jackets, sober, respectful, mildly inconvenienced, brave. The chair where my wife used to sit stood at the head of the table. They had set a plate for her, as if a plate and a name card can host a ghost. I placed the rose on her chair, as gently as one lays a finger on a sleeping child's forehead to check for fever. The petals brushed the wood. I felt it more than heard it. The room went quieter, which I had not thought possible, and I said nothing. Then I took a step back and another, and I left. It is difficult to explain how silence becomes a kind of speech. As I walked down the hall, I could feel their eyes trying to pull words out of me. I kept my mouth closed. I've learned that people confuse shouting with strength. My wife used to say that iron makes no sound while it hardens. Outside, the evening smelled of rain and the neighbor's wet laundry. I stood under the porch light and watched a moth burn itself on it again and again. No one called after me. A door clicked shut. The house breathed out as if relieved. When I was a younger man, I worked 2 jobs for a while. A narrow office by day and a wider night of driving a delivery van with my name on nothing and my body on everything. I used to come home with my hands aching, and my wife would take my fingers in hers and say, "Rest, we're building something." That's how she saw it. The house and the accounts and the education for our children. A scaffolding climbing toward a future where none of us would need to climb again. I wonder now if we built too much comfort and not enough gratitude. Back in the kitchen, I made tea and sat in the dark. I did not flip the light switch. The clink of my spoon against the mug was an old friend. I didn't drink much. My mind wasn't on tea. It was on a drawer upstairs that sticks halfway because I never fixed it after her death. She was the one who made the house smooth, the woman who oiled hinges and people with equal ease. I went upstairs and opened that drawer. The old wood complained, then gave in. Inside was what I wanted. 3 envelopes, thick and heavy, their weight familiar in my palm. I had sealed them myself. The wax was plain. I have never cared for fancy seals. Plain truth needs no decoration. You may ask why a father needs thick envelopes in a house that should run on hugs and laughter. The answer is simple. Love is better when it is not hostage to money. We did well over the years. I saved quietly. I bought land when others bought phones. My wife understood, and once, when she was ill but not afraid, she said, "Promise me one thing. Don't let them trade respect for inheritance. Don't let them negotiate us, I promised." She believed me. That is why the envelopes existed. Inside them were not just papers. There were letters, her letters, and there were documents that made our home and the rental properties and the savings and the lake cabin answer to me as trustee, not to any child's impatience. There was also a clause she wrote in her neat, stubborn script. Any child who denied the father a seat at the family table on her birthday would lose voting rights in the family trust for a season of years. She called it a season, as if you could mark greed with winter and thaw it with spring. The envelope felt heavier than money. That sentence had lodged behind my ribs the day I sealed them. Money is only weight when you carry it in the wrong part of your body. These envelopes carried something else. They carried consequence. They carried love that had learned how to protect itself without shouting. I slept badly that night. Sleep came and went like a timid guest. Once, I woke to the sound of rain on the gutters and thought it was her voice saying, "Be kind, but be firm." I got up before dawn, dressed in the same dark clothes I had worn to the table, and brewed coffee so strong it could stand up on its own. When the light finally shook itself awake in the windows, I called 3 couriers. I gave them addresses that have my blood in their bricks. I gave them envelopes that have my wife in their words. I told each courier, "Deliver, wait for a signature, and if they ask you anything, smile and say it's from their father." The couriers are used to bills and flowers. They did not ask questions. But when I handed the last one the last envelope, he weighed it in his palm as if trying to guess the contents, and he smiled. "Feels heavier than money," he said without thinking. I smiled back, but only with half my face. "Yes," I said, "it does. If you are reading this far, tell me which country holds your eyes tonight. Tell me if fathers still speak there, or if their houses also have rooms where they are only allowed to leave roses. Because my children signed for their envelopes with the same hands that had reached for my wife's birthday cake as toddlers, and by noon their phones were buzzing. A group chat lit up like a power line in a storm. The eldest, "What is this?" The younger, "Dad, call me." The daughter-in-law sent nothing, just those 3 dots that mean words are gathering. I put my phone face down and let the house be quiet again. I am not a cruel man. I am a patient one. Let me tell you what each envelope contained, because content is a mirror, and everyone sees themselves there. In my eldest son's envelope, there was the family trust amendment that we had filed after my wife's diagnosis, signed and notarized, with language so clear even arrogance could understand it. There was also a letter from my wife, dated 3 weeks before she died. She wrote it at the little desk by the bedroom window, the one with the loose knob I never fixed, because she said it reminded her that not everything needs to be perfect. She wrote, "My dear boy, leadership is not deciding who sits at the table. It is pulling up a chair for those you wish would stay." She wrote, "Your father will outlive my voice. Listen to his." She wrote, "If you ever wonder what to do with anger, put it in a jar like the ones I used for jam. Label it and leave it on the shelf." She wrote, "On my birthday, let my chair be a reminder, not a measure. It is not big enough to hold my absence. It is only wood." She signed it with her name and a small heart she used to draw only for the children. In my younger son's envelope, there was a different letter. My wife never wrote the same letter twice. She saw each child as their own country with its own laws. She told the younger, "Kindness turns to smoke if you burn it for other people's applause. Keep the good fire for your own home." She told him to stand next to his father in small ways, like cutting fruit the way his father liked it, or reminding him to wear a scarf when the cold pretends to be wind. And there was a copy of the deed to the lake cabin, with every right held in trust and every decision tied to respect. She knew he loved that place most. It is where he learned to fish and to lie about the size of fish and to believe in mornings. In the third envelope, the one addressed to my daughter-in-law and my youngest partner, I put a letter she had asked me to add, because she was a mother to them too, and mothers have a right to speak. She wrote, "Strength borrowed from marriage is like a dress borrowed from a friend. Wear it with gratitude and return it without stains." She did not have a cruel word in her. Even her warnings sounded like lullabies with wake-up calls woven in. By mid-afternoon, the eldest came first, his car chewing up the driveway like hunger. He did not knock. He walked into my living room with an envelope like a hot coal in his fist. He looked like a boy scolded at school, but pretending he was the principal. "What is this?" he asked, trying for calm. I gestured at the sofa. He didn't sit. Some people believe height is argument. I let him believe it a moment longer. He waved the papers. "You can't be serious. This clause, this punishment." I said nothing. I let the silence be the elder in the room. Finally, I said softly, "It is not punishment. It is memory with teeth." He blinked at that, then laughed harshly. "This is about last night, because we asked you not to make it awkward." I stirred my tea with a small spoon I'd used since my first job. "Our house used to be full of such small, faithful things." "You asked me not to attend your mother's birthday," I said. "In my own home." He looked at the floor, then at the ceiling, as if either could help. "We were protecting the evening," he muttered. "From what?" I asked. "From your father," I did not add. Some truths do not need the extra word. He softened then, a little, and tried another door. "Dad," he said, switching to the voice that had once asked me for just 5 more minutes of bedtime. "This is extreme," I nodded. "So is leaving a rose where your mother sat and being asked to leave." He flinched at that. He is not a heartless boy. He is a boy who learned to pronounce comfort like a password and forgot that a heart is a door, not a safe. He sat down finally, and the envelope rustled in his lap like a trapped bird. "I can fix this," he said. "I'll apologize." I took a breath and let it out slowly. "Apologize," I said, "but not to cancel a document. Apologize because you mean it." He stared at me. "And the clause?" he asked. "A season," I said. "Your mother picked the length. She said a season is long enough to learn something and short enough to welcome someone back." The younger arrived soon after, without knocking, because he never remembers to knock. He stopped in the doorway when he saw his brother on the sofa, and his face did what faces do when truth walks in. It fell a little, then stood up straighter. He held his envelope gently, as if afraid the letter inside could bruise. "Dad," he said, almost whispering. He looked at the kitchen. "Do you have any of those biscuits left?" I did. I brought a plate. He took one, broke it in half, and offered part to his brother. For a moment, the old choreography returned. I was the man at the stove. They were the boys who lived on butter and arguments. The house was the bowl that held us. Then the moment left. They looked at me. "We messed up," the younger said. I nodded. "You did." He nodded back. A tear shocked out of him like a confession. "I read her letter," he said, voice thick. "I remember her handwriting. I remember that little loop she made in her Y's." He smiled painfully. "She wrote about the lake. She told me to keep mornings." He swallowed. "I don't want to lose the cabin." I put down my cup and looked at him. "Then don't lose what it represents." The daughter-in-law came last, without husband, only with courage. She stood very straight and very still, like someone who has practiced standing up. "I read the letter," she said before hello. She was kinder than I deserved. That at least was honest. She held out the envelope. "I don't want anything from the trust," she said. "I want to mend what I helped tear." Her voice did not shake. "I respect that. It takes more than one person to tear a fabric," I said. "But it's easier if everyone watches and no one mends." She nodded. "May I sit?" she asked. "Please," I said. She sat on the edge of the chair like someone prepared to jump up and fix something. That is a good posture for a life. You may be wondering why I did not simply shout the night before. Why I did not raise my voice and declare the house mine and the table mine and the chair my wife's and the birthday my right. I grew up with a father who believed volume was authority. He was not a cruel man. He was a loud one. He considered a slammed door a finished argument. I promised myself long ago that I would be different. Authority does not need to shout. It needs to arrive and sit down and stay. So I sat, and I let the envelopes do the talking. Words printed on paper can be dry, but words written by a mother's hand can be wet enough to soften stone. The days that followed were strange. A quiet negotiation began, the kind where no one says deal, but glasses are moved a little closer, and chairs are repositioned around the table. The eldest bristled less. The younger lingered more. The daughter-in-law started showing up with soup. Small things, small mending. I kept my voice low and my demands lower. I told them that a season is exactly that. Not a life sentence, not a cheap weekend. They would learn to come home without maps. They would learn to sit without me inviting them. They would relearn their mother in the way my hands turned a cup, in the way I folded a napkin the way she used to, in the way I paused before answering. In that pause was the woman they missed. One evening, a week after the couriers, I walked into the dining room at the usual time. The candles were already lit. My wife used to say that a flame makes a face look honest. There was a plate at each place. At her chair, the white rose had gone soft with age, the petals blowing into themselves like a small, private storm. I lifted it and placed it in a bowl of water, a silly gesture, but an old one. She used to float flowers when they were almost done, as if to teach them to let go gently. My eldest stood awkwardly by his chair. He cleared his throat. "Dad," he said, and then stopped. In my family, Dad was often the whole sentence. I waited. He looked at me, and this time there was no mask. "I'm sorry," he said, "for deciding for you, for deciding about her, for deciding about everything." His shoulders dropped a little. He was a boy again, for a blink, in the hallway of our first apartment, where he learned to tie his shoes while his mother clapped quietly. So as not to scare success, I did not say, "I forgive you." Forgiveness is not a gate you swing open with the right words. It is a path you walk with the right steps. I said, "Come sit." He sat. The younger arrived, slightly breathless, always late to his own kindness, and he grinned at me, that crooked grin that always reminded his mother of a bird landing on a wire. "I brought the jam," he announced, holding up a jar with a label in her handwriting. He had found it in the back of the pantry. Raspberry. The year on the lid was one when none of us got enough sleep, and all of us got enough love. We passed the jar around like a fragile story. We ate more toast than anyone needs. We talked about nothing in particular, and the nothing was exactly what we needed. People think revenge is a big bang, a falling curtain, a face turning pale, and a gasp that makes the chandelier tremble. Sometimes it is. Sometimes you present a document and watch power change seats like a gentleman changing chairs at a concert. But the best revenge, if I may use that heavy, itchy word, is simple. It is getting your seat back. It is letting the letter a dead woman wrote do more work than 1,000 shouted sentences. It is the quiet rule of a season, not to humiliate, but to teach. During that season, the trust lost no weight. What lost weight was the distance in the room. It thinned. My eldest began calling me for things that had nothing to do with signatures. He asked how to fix a leaky tap, and when I told him, he listened all the way to the end without pretending to already know. My younger came by on a Tuesday to watch a game he did not care about because he knew I did. He brought chips and ate most of them. He told me jokes that missed their mark and then hid it on the way back. My daughter-in-law learned how my wife used to fold the laundry with a small flick at the end that makes towels look like they're nodding. She learned where we kept the cinnamon and how we always ran out of it because my wife overseasoned sweetness. Little by little, the season in the claws did not feel like punishment anymore. It felt like weather we had needed to pass through. There were setbacks. There always are. One Sunday, the eldest said something about the house, eventually being ours, and I saw the old greed pull his mouth into the wrong shapes. I looked at him for a long second, and then I said, "Not ours." "Holmes." He blinked, then nodded. He did not apologize. He adjusted. That's how adults change, not with fireworks, but with small, steady course corrections. Another afternoon, the younger got loud about a decision I made regarding a rental property, and his loudness was not the helpful kind. I let him talk until his throat tired. Then I said, "Not today, Ethan," though his name is not Ethan. He understood anyway. "You'd be in the way," I added flatly, and he laughed, then sighed. "We have our lines. We have our ways of saying, 'I love you. Please stop.' As for me, I took long walks down to the lake where the cabin waits between trees like a story demoted to scenery. I remembered our first summer there, my wife swinging her feet off the dock, the boys inventing games that required nothing but air and arguments, the way our family fit into that space as if it had been designed for us by someone who knew our measurements. On one walk, I stopped by the little hardware store where everyone knows which screw you need before you do. The owner asked after the boys. I said they were fine. He said, "I heard you sent them big envelopes." I said, "I sent them their mother." He nodded, as if I had told him the weather. "Good," he said. "It's been dry." The season ended the day before her birthday the following year. I woke early and made tea and stood again in the hallway the way I had stood the year before, except this time my hands were not empty. They held nothing, yes, but they were not empty. They held everything they had carried all year, grief smoothed by routine, love heavy enough to be dignity, a strange new peace that tasted like a well-worn prayer. The house felt different. Houses change like faces do. They know when the people inside have made up their minds. This time, my children did not debate whether I should attend. This time, my eldest called me the night before to ask what dessert I wanted, and I told him, "Your mother's lemon pie," and he said, "I'll try," and he failed beautifully. This time, my younger arrived early to set the table, and he placed the fork on the left and the knife on the right, wrong at first, then corrected himself. This time, my daughter-in-law brought flowers, not white roses, but a small wild mix, because she said, "Your wife liked the surprise colors," and she was right. This time, I did not carry a white rose to her chair. I placed one near the window instead, where she used to keep them in a jar, as if to say, "We are not worshipping an empty chair. We are remembering a full life. We ate. We told stories that embarrassed each other. We cried a little when the lemon pie collapsed in the middle like a sigh. At one point, the eldest raised his glass and said, 'To Mother,' and then, after a heartbeat, 'To Father, who taught us that silence can be a sentence.' He meant it as praise. It landed as instruction. We drank. We sat long after the plates were empty. We did not check our phones. We did not hurry to end. A family is not a thing you finish. It is a place you keep coming back to until you recognize it again. Later that night, after everyone left and the house went back to its late rhythm, I returned to the study and opened the same sticky drawer. The envelopes were gone. They had done their work. In their place, I put 3 new letters, short ones with no seals. I wrote them quickly, with the confidence of a man who finally knows the right length for a thank you. To my eldest, I wrote, "I saw you pull out my chair tonight before I reached the table. I saw you look at the rose by the window. You are learning the right order of things." To my younger, I wrote, "You fixed the candle that kept leaning. Your mother used to do that. It matters." To my daughter-in-law, I wrote, "You made room for mistakes. That's the corner of the table we stand on." I would hand these next week, not as couriers do, but as fathers do, hand to hand, eye to eye. The circle calm again. You might think the story ends here, with a neat bow and candles that never drip. But life does not end, it turns. A month later, my eldest called to say the roof of his house had started leaking, and that he'd called a repairman who quoted a price that made him swear softly. I went over with my toolbox. We crawled through the attic, 2 men and a history of loud and quiet between them. We patched the leak badly, and then called the repairman anyway, but the hour we spent up there did more than seal a seam. It gave him a picture to hold when he thinks of me next time. Not a man in a hallway holding a rose and leaving, but a man with a wrench, laughing at the dust. That is an inheritance too, the kind you cannot argue about in a lawyer's office. And the younger? He asked to borrow the cabin for a weekend with his partner. And when he left, he put the keys on my kitchen table and said, "We changed the sheets and we scrubbed the pans. And we left a small jar of raspberry jam." He held up his hands like a burglar returning the loot. He grinned. I grinned back. "Good," I said. "It's been dry." Sometimes, when the wind rattles the gutters the way rain used to, I think of those envelopes and how they crossed the city to land in my children's hands like 3 small ships returning home. The envelope felt heavier than money. It did, because it carried something no bank stores, a mother's voice and a father's quiet spine, the kind you do not see until you lean against it and find it keeps you up. That weight is what held us steady. That weight is what taught us that tables are not stages, and chairs are not thrones, and birthdays are not negotiations. They are returns. So, if you've traveled this whole way with me, tell me one last thing. Tell me where you are watching from. Tell me if the rose means the same thing there. Tell me if fathers in your city still bring flowers to chairs, and if sons still learn the taste of apology without a court order. Tell me if your mother kept a box of cards, and if she drew little hearts next to her name, and if your hands still know the curve of her handwriting in the dark when you cannot sleep. Tell me these things so I can imagine the map lit up with small lights, one for every reader who decides to set a place for respect tonight. Because that is what we did in the end. We set a place for respect between the knives that cut and the forks that lift. We set it down and kept it there, and when someone tried to move it again, we laid a hand on the table and said, in a voice that didn't need to rise, "Not today." You'd be in the way. The house learned our new rhythm. The window caught our reflections. And the rose by the glass, floating in its little bowl, gave up its last color without complaint, which is what love often looks like when it becomes memory. A soft surrender that leaves the room more itself than before. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of a father you miss, or a mother whose handwriting you still see when you close your eyes, do one kind thing for me. Like this, share it with someone who might need it tonight. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what line stayed with you. And subscribe so you don't miss the next story we set at this same table.